Somewhere behind a house in the dark, something screams. Not a howl, not a hoot, a scream, high-pitched, human-sounding, cutting straight through the silence. A homeowner grabs the phone, calls 911, tells the dispatcher there's a woman screaming somewhere out in the yard. Police arrive within minutes. Flashlights sweep across the grass, the trees, the edge of the property. No woman, no struggle, no sign of anyone in danger at all. This isn't a rare, one-time mistake. Police departments across the country receive calls like this regularly. Dispatchers who've worked rural routes long enough learn to recognize the pattern almost immediately. And every single time, once officers finally trace the sound to its source, they find the same thing. Not a person, a bird. Pale, silent in flight, perched somewhere just out of sight. Today, we're going inside the science of a scream so convincingly human, it has fooled police departments, terrified homeowners, and fueled ghost stories for centuries, and the reason evolution built a bird that sounds almost exactly like us. Meet the barn owl. Pale, heart-shaped face, golden buff back. One of the most widely distributed owl species on the entire planet, found on nearly every continent except Antarctica. Here's the detail that surprises most people. When you picture an owl calling at night, you probably picture a hoot, that soft, rhythmic sound most owl species are known for. Barn owls don't do that at all. According to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, American barn owls don't hoot the way most owls do. Instead, they produce something entirely different. A long, harsh scream, lasting roughly 2 seconds, delivered mostly by males, often called out repeatedly while flying. This isn't a soft bird-like sound. Researchers and wildlife guides consistently describe it the same way. Harsh, rasping, drawn out. A shriek that carries clearly across open fields and quiet neighborhoods, often described as sounding closer to television static abruptly switched on, or something pulled straight out of a horror movie. And unlike many birds, which call primarily from a fixed perch, barn owls frequently deliver this scream while flying, low and silent, directly over open yards, fields, and rooftops. Which means the sound doesn't just happen somewhere far off in the woods. It happens directly above people's homes, at exactly the moment they're least prepared to hear it. To understand why this specific sound triggers such a strong reaction, you have to understand something about how the human brain processes danger. Humans are specifically wired to react strongly to sounds that resemble human distress. A scream, a cry, a shout for help, these trigger an almost automatic alarm response evolved over countless generations because ignoring a real human in danger carried enormous survival costs. Researchers studying this kind of misidentification point to a consistent pattern. A loud, sudden, high-pitched noise, especially one heard unexpectedly, in darkness without any visual context, will reliably trigger that same alarm response regardless of what actually produced it. The barn owl's scream fits this pattern almost perfectly. It's loud, it's sudden, it carries the same general pitch range and abrupt quality as human vocal distress, and it typically happens at night when visibility is at its lowest and uncertainty is at its highest. Under those specific conditions, the brain doesn't have time to carefully analyze acoustic details. It reacts first and asks questions later, which is exactly why a homeowner standing in a dark backyard, hearing this sound for the first time, so often reaches immediately for the phone. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It happens regularly enough that wildlife agencies and police departments have developed something close to a routine response. State wildlife departments in multiple regions across the United States periodically post public reminders on social media, specifically explaining that the screaming, shrieking sounds residents are reporting almost always trace back to wildlife, not people in danger. And it isn't only barn owls generating these calls. Wildlife biologists note that red foxes produce a similarly disturbing scream during mating season, a sound so convincingly human that researchers studying urban fox populations have documented residents calling police believing someone was being attacked. But the barn owl remains one of the most consistently cited sources. Its scream is loud enough to carry across considerable distances, distinctive enough to be immediately unsettling, and common enough given how widely distributed the species is, that most rural and suburban areas across the country have at least occasional barn owl activity nearby. Dispatchers and officers who work in areas with established barn owl populations often learn to recognize the pattern of these calls specifically. A report of a woman screaming, "No visible distress, no other witnesses," typically late at night, in an area with open fields, barns, or older structures nearby, the kind of habitat barn owls specifically favor. Here's what makes this entire situation almost ironic. The barn owl isn't screaming at anyone. It isn't distressed. It isn't in danger. According to research compiled by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, this scream, sometimes called the advertisement call, serves an entirely different purpose. Males use it primarily to announce their presence, communicate territory, and signal availability to nearby females, particularly during the early stages of the breeding season. It's not a cry for help. It's closer to a broadcast, a deliberate, far-carrying announcement specifically designed to travel across open space and be heard clearly by other owls at considerable distance. Barn owls have an additional vocal repertoire beyond this scream, a softer, more wavering call, sometimes described as purring, used between mates or by begging young, and a sharp, defensive hiss, lasting several seconds, used specifically to warn off predators or intruders approaching a nest. But it's that long, piercing scream, the advertisement call, echoing across open fields at night, that consistently gets mistaken for something it was never meant to be, a sound built entirely for communication between owls, accidentally landing directly in the middle of human ears, never designed to filter it out. If this story is changing the way you'll react the next time you hear something unsettling outside at night, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps stories like this reach more people. Long before anyone was calling 911, this specific sound had already earned the barn owl a very particular reputation. Its nickname, in many parts of the world, is simply the screech owl, a name separate from the smaller, distinct screech owl species found in the Americas. Pale, silent in flight, and most often heard around barns, old buildings, and quiet rural properties, barn owls have been described consistently across generations and across cultures as ghostly. That reputation isn't accidental. Their flight is nearly silent, thanks to specialized, softly fringed wing feathers that muffle the sound of air moving over them. Their coloring, pale white and buff, seems to glow faintly under moonlight, and their call, that same piercing scream, rather than any kind of hoot, breaks the expected pattern people associate with owls entirely. For centuries, long before anyone understood the biology behind it, a pale shape appearing silently at night, delivering a sound disturbingly close to a human scream, was more than enough to fuel local folklore. Ghost stories, omens, warnings passed down through generations of rural communities who heard this exact sound echoing across their fields after dark. Modern science has fully explained the biology, but the emotional reaction, that immediate instinctive chill, hasn't really changed at all. So, what does a misidentified scream, repeated across thousands of 911 calls, actually reveal? Partly, it's a story about how disconnected modern life has become from the specific sounds of the natural world. For most of human history, people lived close enough to wildlife and depended on understanding it closely enough that a sound like this would have been immediately, instinctively recognized. Today, especially as suburban development continues to expand into what was previously rural or wild habitat, more people are encountering wildlife sounds they've simply never learned to identify. Wildlife officials generally view these mistaken calls without frustration. A concerned resident who genuinely believes someone might be in danger and calls for help is doing exactly the right thing, given the information they have in that moment. The barn owl isn't doing anything wrong either. It's simply doing precisely what evolution built it to do, announcing itself across open space, exactly the way it has for millions of years, entirely unaware that its call happens to overlap so unsettlingly with our own. So the next time you hear a scream cutting through the dark, somewhere out past your yard, with no other sound around it. Pause just for a moment before you assume the worst. There's a real chance you're not hearing anyone in danger at all. You're hearing a pale, silent winged bird somewhere out in the dark simply announcing that it's there. Not a cry for help, a message meant for another owl entirely that just happens to sound disturbingly, unmistakably like one of us. If this story changed the way you'll react the next time you hear it, subscribe to Birdhearts so you never miss the next hidden mystery in the bird world. And tell me in the comments, have you ever heard a sound at night that turned out to be a bird instead of what you feared? I'll see you in the next one.